With 20,000 incredible reviews, 38 million users worldwide, CyberGhost proves to be the most effective, efficient, and most importantly, protective VPN in the world. Every time you go online, there are eyes watching, even from incognito mode. Your internet service provider, work, school, maybe even your Wi-Fi router are pathways for people to track what you do online. CyberGhost VPN can protect you from those threats. Start with selecting one of over 100 locations to encrypt and reroute all of your online traffic through their secure servers. In this, you will know for a fact that no one is following your online activity. CyberGhost also helps you unlock geo-restricted games, shows, and various forms of content from over 40 streaming platforms, such as Sidemen content on Netflix or several other shows from Amazon or Disney+. Think of the deals you can secure by simply changing your virtual location. This works on all major devices and operating systems, from Windows to Mac OS and Android to iOS. You can protect up to 7 devices at the same time, so you can get your whole family or whole squad protected. With my link in the description, get your incredible deal starting with $2.03 a month and 4 months free, translating to 84% off. Not to worry, there is also a 45-day money-back guarantee. CyberGhost VPN is a fantastic product that you can trust to handle all your online activity. Use my link in the description down below, and thank you CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring today's video.
Hello.
Our story begins with a person lost in time, though that person is not Luke Skywalker. It is, instead, his wife, Mara Jade. She has gone missing from the temple grounds at Yavin 4. It was not a sudden disappearance, nor was it an accident. There was a disturbance at the Jedi Temple. Luke was awoken when he heard the screams. Terror ran through his heart. His first thoughts went back to Order 66 and everything he learned about the Jedi Purge. There had been external threats that Luke worried about, so he rushed from his quarters with his lightsaber in his hand, only to see nothing. The screams echoed and pulsated inside of his head, and he touched his temple ever so delicately. Focus reverberated through his body, and his eyes landed on a red silhouette, rushing into the forest. Luke turned to his students, who exited their abodes to the sight of their Grand Master. His hand raised, gesturing to his saber and insinuating that he wanted them to protect themselves. His boots pressed into the dirt and he started off towards the jungle. It was not hard to track the red shadows. It was still nighttime, and the further he went into the forest, the darker it got. Luke's senses, though, were much more attuned. He felt through the force and found his targets. Once they crossed his eyes, he leapt into the air, activating his emerald lightsaber and slamming down into the middle of them. His saber slashed towards the first of the red guards. Their staves all activated, slicing and jabbing at the Grand Master, who twirled around with ease, deflecting and defending. His saber plunged into the side of one of the guards before slashing the robes of one of the sentinels. Skywalker backed away from another strike, parrying another opponent before spinning between them and decapitating them both. With the wave of his hand, another guard was flung through the air and into a tree. His saber swiped forward and stopped at an orb-like mask. Inside of it, he saw the face of the late Emperor Palpatine. This would be the second time Palpatine had resurrected himself. Luke had already faced the Dark Lord on the Death Star, and, again, following the defeat of the Empire. But now, this was something else entirely. A sinister smile covered the face of the creature inside the mask. It was not Emperor Palpatine, but simply a pawn. It spoke to him in a riddle, referring to Luke as a Jedi Master and explaining that a most precious person had been taken, far away to a place forsaken, unseen by his generation, to a father still unshaken. The sentinel clasped his hands, calling Luke by his name, and telling him directly that he will never see her again. Long live the Empire. The sentinel's orb sizzled out, and the body fell limp to the forest floor. Another iteration of the Emperor, now dead. Luke used his lightsaber to shine the forest floor. The darkness brightened, and he saw an obelisk object on the ground. He reached down and picked it up to accessorize it. There was a red glow and beating hum. It felt like a pulse, and he closed his eyes, opening up a wide array of timelines that he hadn't ever seen before. he pocketed the device and walked back towards his temple to see who had gone. And he'd be devastated to learn that only Mara Jade was missing. He hoped that it wasn't her, but he knew her voice better than anyone else alive. It was her scream, her terror. She was apprehended by her old master, taken to a time Luke did not know. All he had was a riddle and an unknown answer. Once everyone understood that Mara was gone, he sauntered off to the holocron room to settle himself and ease his mind. He then repeated the riddle to himself again and again. A most precious person had been taken, far away to a place forsaken, unseen by his generation, to a father still unshaken. Luke thought to himself, focusing on the word father. It was all connected to that. Generation, maybe that has to do with a pre-Empire galaxy? It likely did in Luke's mind. A forsaken time, a place where his father hadn't been broken by the curse of the dark side? Luke thought on the history of the galaxy, and then of course, the Clone Wars. He had studied the battles, especially the ones where his father was at. Anaxis, Umbara, Ringo Vinda, Christophsis, Coruscant, Ryloth, Geonosis? It could be any one of those, but Luke settled on a day, a battle that changed everything. If his studies were correct, Anakin Skywalker lost his forearm during the first battle of the Clone War. According to Skywalker's own journal, it was a day following his mother's death, and a few days before his marriage to Padme Amidala in secrecy. Luke pressed his hands to the floor and allowed the holocron room to swell around him. The obelisk could be a trap, he understood that, but Luke could not let Mara be stuck in time. The Jedi were safe with Leia if need be. He trusted her more than anyone else in the galaxy aside from his wife. His eyes closed. The Force billowed invisibly around his back, under his shoulders, above his head, through his nostrils. It was a connection that he had practiced time and time again. The obelisk opened up, and through it, a portal to a land beyond time. As he entered, the obelisk stayed behind. Sidious had created this with the intention of trapping Luke Skywalker inside the Clone War era, so that any future plans he had of domination could not be undone by attachment, specifically the one Vader had for his son. The resurrected Darth Sidious, from shortly after the destruction of the Empire at Endor, came up with a strategy designed for Skywalker, a failsafe in case he failed, like he did. Mara Jade was the target, one that would be used to exploit Luke's emotional attachment, being that Sidious foresaw Luke's failure to see the rationale behind the Old Order's attachment rule. Of course, none of this future mattered unless the Sentinel that escorted Mara to the past delivered the message to his former self, the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. It was the perfect plan to ensure that Palpatine never allowed Vader to get too close, and that he protected himself from the future Jedi Grand Master. Even if Vader won on the second Death Star, or if the first Death Star ever got destroyed in the first place, Emperor Palpatine's resurrection would go unbothered. There were too many variables for Sidious to calculate, so he was simply content with the concept of ensuring that at least one iteration of himself succeeded in the timeline by trapping Luke in the past. Luke Skywalker woke up in the halls of the Geonosian arena, without the obelisk. He could hear bugs chanting, an explosion of cheers, and the rolling of destroyer droids. Count Dooku stood on his perch, threatening the Jedi from afar. Luke smiled at the sight of his mother. He hadn't seen her in person, and she was just as the history books described her. His father wore a Padawan braid, and by my stars, is that mullet one Kenobi? Luke examined the field and turned towards the stands to see if he could see his wife, but she wasn't visible. With the flip of his wrists, his hood fell onto his head, and he steadied himself. Dooku spoke condescendingly down towards the Jedi, and so Luke, with the raise of his hand and the clench of his fist, all of the droidicas were swallowed up by the Force and the sand that they stood on top of. It was as if worms from beneath the surface ate them each at once. The reek that the trio rode on top of started rushing away from the destroyed droidicas. The Geonosians started chasing after them. Luke looked at Dooku from afar, who seemed very unamused at the situation, assuming Anakin or Obi-Wan had done this. Skywalker stayed out of sight and drifted along the edge of the arena, using the distraction in the middle to cover his approach, as Mace Windu ignited his lightsaber in a threat of Dooku and Jango Fett. The situation unfolded while hundreds of Jedi ignited their weapons. The Geonosian arena erupted into total chaos. Bugs and Jedi engaged in their own small conflicts, with thousands of battle droids rushing in. Luke watched Mace fly towards the surface while ripping his on-fire robes off. The other Jedi jumped down to the arena for their own varying battles. Luke knew that there was no point in getting involved on the surface here. 200 Jedi volunteered for this mission to Geonosis. Less than half of them would return to Coruscant alive. Skywalker was here to retrieve his wife, and he did figure why not help out his mother, father, and his first teacher a little bit, which is why he destroyed the destroyer droids. He did have a very important conversation to hold with Tyrannus though. It was easy to assume that Sidious wanted Mara Jade somewhere safe, but Luke knew most of Palpatine's hideouts on Coruscant by this point. There were several inside the capital city from the Imperial database, and while some of them were dated due to being hideouts from the Imperial era, it still would be worth his time to investigate them, after talking with Dooku. Luke understood that there were ramifications to interacting with the past, but his wife was sent to this time period if he understood the riddle correctly. The riddle basically confirmed it too, so he needed to confirm that she wasn't on Geonosis. Skywalker saw Coleman Trebor rushing towards the tower, and decided that the best diplomat inside the council chambers should be spared. So with a twist of his hand, he knocked Coleman's feet out from under him, forcing the Jedi Master to tumble to the ground. Luke, on the other hand, used the Force to leap up to the perch, where Dooku, Gunray, and Jango all stood. Once he landed, still with his black robes covering his head, he ignited his emerald lightsaber. Jango aimed his weapon at Luke, preparing to fire it, but Luke had other thoughts. He knew about Jango, and of course Boba. As a Jedi who had seen the power of change, he believed that the Fett boy could have a much different future with his father inside the picture. He blocked the few shots that came his way with ease, before launching Jango into the wall with the Force, and knocking him completely unconscious. Dooku looked at the Jedi boy, as he referred to him as a boy, and demanded to know who he was. Luke did not explain. Instead, he wanted answers. Where was his wife? Tyrannus was beyond confused. He tried to get an explanation from his opponent, but Luke did not explain his situation. Time travel could skew everything. The Jedi Grand Master's saber buzzed by his side, and he pointed his metallic hand at the fallen Jedi. Dooku did not budge. He was not intimidated, and he knew nothing about a Jedi's wife, or a Mara Jade. He told the young Jedi to stand down or to suffer. Luke raised his saber into an iteration of Form 4, and the Count readied his own weapon, challenging the individual that he believed to be nothing more than a mere knight. Tyrannus activated his curved hilt and jabbed it at Skywalker, who parried and stepped back, allowing Dooku to take the early offensive. They fought through the halls behind him, in the corridors of the arena, while Coleman Trebor regained his footing and apprehended Jango and Nute Gunray with ease. It was a small move, but it allowed Trebor to survive the Clone War and make some political moves that could benefit the Jedi Order. Luke wasn't worried about the future that was held there. There were some small changes made because of him, but in his mind, not enough to completely rupture the timeline, as long as he didn't kill Dooku, which he wasn't going to do. Skywalker very simply wanted to save his wife, and his opponent had no clue what he was talking about. Unfortunately, that was the truth too. Dooku's saber dragged down the wall as he utilized his perfect iteration of Form 2 to attack his youthful opponent. Luke backed away, truthfully struggling with the mastery of the blade from his opponent. That was the one advantage that Tyrannus had over him. Skywalker may have had over 2 decades of training, but Dooku had nearly a century, and the dark side hadn't eaten away at him yet. The deeper they went into the halls, the darker it got, leaving Emerald and Crimson to continue slashing and clashing away at each other. It created a beautiful array of light that allowed the duelists to track the other's movements. It was a dance of talents and skills. Just as Dooku got an upper hand, a coughing could be heard from down the hall, truly intimidating. General Grievous, ordered to observe the battle, could hear an engagement inside the corridors. He came to investigate, hoping that he might secure himself a minor first victory, and instead, he found the duel between Dooku and a hooded Jedi. His own blue lightsaber ignited, and he prepared for a fight. Skywalker gripped his weapon with both hands and batted at Dooku, who stumbled backwards. Luke's saber swung back across his body and went on the offensive against Grievous. The droid general collided, using his raw metallic power to overpower his smaller Jedi foe. But Luke's size was not his strength, it was the fortitude of his mind. He'd gone toe-to-toe with Vader and the Emperor. He could handle this. Grievous's cybernetics struggled to keep up with Luke's variations and evolution of several different lightsaber forms. Every time Luke switched between 4 or 5, sometimes even 3, Grievous lagged behind because Luke had to change the iterations due to Palpatine purging the old Jedi forms. They were irregular moves, and the programming didn't know what to do with them. It even hurt Dooku during their 1 versus 1. Luke, though, did not stop. He blocked a strike from Tyrannus before spinning behind a wall, allowing Grievous to lodge his saber in the edge. Luke demanded an answer about Mara Jade, but Tyrannus taunted the young Jedi, reminding him that attachments are forbidden. He'll make sure the poor woman is ejected from the Order after telling the Grand Master about their arrangement. Luke mumbled to himself. He was the Grand Master. He stepped out from behind the wall, countering Dooku, bashing his saber down towards the hilt, sending a weird shockwave through Dooku's wrists. Luke stomped between them, crushing through Grievous's hip and slapping backwards in the same go, cutting through Dooku's collarbone and killing him in that strike. As Tyrannus hit the ground, Skywalker's saber jabbed through Grievous's chest, killing him immediately on impact. He steadied backwards, rolling his saber in his hands, and looking at his mistake. That is, after all, what it was. He didn't even mean to land either killing blow. He just wanted to neutralize his opponents. But he was in the moment. It was thrilling in a way. Luke was beyond the age of chasing adventure for the sake of adventure, but he never faced a true challenge in his era. All of his training for Sidious's return, and he never felt the thrill of an engagement with an individual worthy of his skill. Now he had, and they were simply overpowered, not strong enough. And that was the problem now. 2 of the most integral characters for the Separatist Alliance were now dead, and he still knew nothing about Mara Jade's location. He sheathed his lightsaber and disappeared into the darkness. Coleman Trebor chased after the sound of the duel and found Dooku's and Grievous's defeated and mangled bodies. This was a triumph for the Republic and the Jedi Order, but a total shift to the timeline and something that could completely alter Luke's very existence. The Grand Master rushed through the corridors, looking for a vessel, before eventually settling on Slave 1 and using it to escape the besieged planet. There would be no duel between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Dooku. There would be no death of Coleman Trebor. Nute Gunray and Jango Fett were captured. The identity of Tyrannus and the source of the clone army were just days away from being learned by the Jedi. The Clone Wars as a galactic conflict sat in the balance. Everything could change. It could all fall apart. And Luke had just done that in the span of less than 20 minutes, by accident. He flipped the hyperdrive and departed into hyperspace with the bounty hunter starship. The ramifications of the Battle of Geonosis were widespread. Sidious, aware of Mara Jade and where her location was, had to adjust. He didn't suspect his future self to send such a powerful Jedi to his doorstep. But then again, if his older self was decrepit and wounded, then why not allow him the honor of defeating 2 Grand Masters? Killing Luke would be the perfect setup for defeating Yoda. However, there were an assortment of immediate problems, starting all with Dooku's death. Tyrannus was set to lead the Confederacy, and their immediate reaction following Geonosis was to split. A war coalition formed, and a peaceful one did too. Systems inside the CIS had no backbone without Dooku, so within days, half of the planets that joined this new government abandoned it for the Neutral Systems Coalition. They had a better chance to survive without the Republic bearing down on them. It was a political move to protect themselves from conflict. Of course, there were other side effects, aside from half the Confederacy disappearing overnight. Without Dooku or Grievous, Sidious needed a new student to handle the war for him, meaning that Asajj Ventress got herself a chance. She was an experienced assassin, one with many talents, and someone that shouldn't be able to defeat Skywalker in a duel, but also provide Anakin with enough of a challenge to grow. Sidious would train her personally, so that she could put up a solid fight against Anakin and help him form into the future Lord Vader he needed him to become. Admiral Trench, on the other hand, became the leader of all Separatist military operations, as some of the politicians that were close and loyal to Tyrannus were influenced by super PACs owned by former Damask Holdings funds. These were all under Palpatine's control, and it helped him keep the war effort alive inside the other government, the same way he would have had Dooku not died. Yet there was another problem, again resulting from Luke's very involvement. Anakin Skywalker, the young, impressionable Padawan, saw some of Luke's combat. He saw a briefing from the members of the High Council that managed to get a hold of security footage from inside the arena of the duel between Luke and Dooku. Anakin had a Jedi that seemed close in age to him that had several talents. It was an unknown force of nature that he aspired to be like, a powerful Jedi that clearly understood his talents and had no fear of using them without the dark side. The fact that the High Council was so interested made Anakin want to be like it more. This was an Anakin Skywalker who did not lose his arm, that never faced defeat on Geonosis, and following the battle, got married. He was soaring high after one of his hardest lows he'd ever experienced. Now he had something to shoot for, something that didn't pull him towards darkness because Luke never exhibited any use of the dark side, not even with his quiet arrival to the arena. Additionally, there was another problem from the Jedi High Council. While Obi-Wan became a master with Anakin becoming a knight, he did not join their ranks. Coleman Trebor, the remarkable negotiator, perhaps the best inside the Order, had apprehended Nute Gunray, Jango Fett, and Boba Fett. These three captures were very important for the Order. Gunray's removal from the Separatist Council with Dooku's death added tension to an already strained and afraid group of people. The Viceroy was being thrown back into the courts, but not held by them as it was before, meaning the Jedi were negotiating for a lifetime prison sentence for Gunray and his allies. Jango was forced to speak because the Jedi were willing to make a negotiation with him to let him and Boba off, as long as they agreed to tell the truth and retire from bounty hunting altogether. Jango, as a result, took the opportunity and did as they asked, connecting Dooku and Tyrannus as separate identities for the same man. There were some other details, but Jango was doing this as a service to his son. He cared far more about Boba than loyalty to a dead man or the Sith. Thanks to Dooku and the Kaminoans, Jango had enough credits to get by, and hell, the Jedi even allowed him and Boba to stay on Kamino, as long as they promised to not interfere with the Grand Army or their processes, which they did. Luke's arrival on Coruscant went unnoticed for weeks. He remained on the outside, watching the galaxy shift because of his own actions. He was completely unaware of the mistakes he had made that completely changed the course of galactic history, until he monitored the news on Coruscant. Entire history books, holocrons, and data reports had been changed just because he couldn't stop himself from ending Dooku's life accidentally. It wasn't exactly for the worst either, though it should be said that without Dooku and Gunray, the Separatist war machine was activated to its full power, meaning that the reserve fleet built before the war became activated. Yet, with an early war defeat at Christophsis, the Separatist war machine stalled. Admiral Trench lost a battle to General Anakin Skywalker, leaving them without a true source of leadership. All the various battle droids tried to communicate, but struggled thanks to various members of the sentient leadership vying for control over the military. It was another dagger in the side of Palpatine's war against the galaxy, especially while Trench had months to recover. He was watching his back for any signs of this mysterious future Grand Master that managed to kill Tyrannus and Grievous in one battle. Palpatine did not fear Luke, but he didn't lower his guard either. Mara Jade was within his control, but Skywalker couldn't find her. Instead, he went to locations that hadn't been renovated yet. Emperor Palpatine moved away from the works and removed it from his official records. He used the Imperial Palace and various layers inside the Senate District because he didn't want to travel across the city to use the dark side somewhere else. It's exactly why Grandmaster Luke had no clue where the Chancellor was hiding during his downtime. He was also almost impossible to track. So while Luke couldn't make the moves he wanted to, he did assess galactic events from an upper-level hotel in the Coruscant Plaza. There was a direct parallel between father and son during this time. Luke never saw his father on the billboards, but Anakin and Luke were practicing the light religiously. Anakin was harmonizing when he wasn't in battle, and while Ahsoka very quickly became his apprentice, he actually found it relieving. He needed someone to keep him level. She was that for him. Anakin used his time training Ahsoka as an extension of his lessons in the Force. He truly never realized that one could reach a full potential by using the light side, and Luke had given him that understanding. He was dedicated unlike ever before in his life because of that hologram tape of Luke and Dooku. Luke, on the other hand, was just going through his normal exercises, as he would have in the future, while watching over the Chancellor. Thanks to the Neutral Systems Coalition taking in planets that abandoned the Confederacy, the war became a stalemate. There were overpopulated droid armies defending planets because they didn't have orders to go anywhere else. The vastly undersized Grand Army of the Republic got into slog matches with droids, but never really got overrun the way they should have with the full military activated. The Separatist War Council may have had the wherewithal to activate said reserve military, but they didn't have the strategy or comprehension to use it properly. This allowed Anakin to develop a rivalry with Asajj Ventress, who was specifically sent to planets where Anakin was to seek out a fight with him. They had already experienced engagements in 5 battles following Geonosis, including one on Tatooine, another on Teth, one on Christophsis, and 2 others elsewhere. Early on into the war, she had the upper hand. She was older than he, and far more ready for combat. Sidious's personal instruction for her helped her develop her skills for battle against Skywalker, but it was also great for him to learn patience and use the light side to find victory. Coleman Trebor, in the meantime, negotiated a lifetime prison sentence for Nute Gunray, and his allies captured at Geonosis. The threat was made clear to Lot Dod and Goom Sam inside the Senate, that if they continued to serve these evil entities, the truth would come out and they would face life in prison. For cowardice people, it stuck to them in their hearts and in their minds. They had no option but to consider their loyalties as a result. Luke's hunt for Mara Jade did not come to a conclusion thanks to trailing Palpatine. It actually came from a week-long dedicated meditation. Similarly to a Barash vow, Luke delved deep into the Force and experienced a connection. It was the furthest he had ever gone into the Force during his tenure as a Jedi Master, and it was out of desperation. In a manner similar to historical dyads, he could feel her heartbeat, and it echoed towards him like a sonar blip. That was perhaps the best way to describe it. The two of them were infatuated with one another, and that was his way of connecting to her and she with him. She was stuck in a sedated meditation because she couldn't really do anything. Palpatine had trapped her, and she was waiting for her moment to break free. Mara was not a damsel in this case, but she wasn't going to get herself killed for nothing. She trusted that her husband was coming at some point, and she had every intention of getting back to her timeline too. When she sensed Luke, she broke herself out of her restraints and readied her weapon. Sidious was not home though. The Chancellor had been doing damage control, and very infrequently spent time at his lair. Mara would break herself out whenever he wasn't present, so that she could figure a way out of this hellhole timeline. Because she knew Luke was coming, she didn't want to miss him by going out of her way to escape. Most of her attempts had been trying to figure out how to return to her own time, but the Palpatine of the future era never told the Palpatine of this era, so he had no clue how it was done. The resurrected Sidious that sent her here had no intention of anyone finding their way back to the future. Wait, like the hit franchise? Luke arrived shortly before Palpatine did. He and Mara embraced and kissed after being separated for over a month. Their enemy remained a threat though. She showed him all of her personal research over the course of the past month or so. But while they were going through it, Sidious returned. He was annoyed as ever, and rushed for the first time to take his day out on someone. He had kept Mara as a tool for torturing Luke. He never killed her because she was a tool, as the future Sidious suggested she would be. Instead, today, he actually planned on killing her and forcing Skywalker to suffer in his failure, kinda like Anakin did. Instead of being able to take his day out on Mara, the Nightmare Jedi had found him. Their sabers all ignited, Palpatine using his 2 weapons and Mara eagerly waiting for her chance to get some sweet revenge. The Jedi moved in, with Sidious ducking out of the way, parrying each of them. His sabers swept through the floor, leaving heated indents, but he collided with each of them. From there, each of their weapons moved with exceptional speed. Sidious was a remarkable talent with the blade. He couldn't be stopped. He sped at them, cutting towards their bodies but never making actual contact. Luke eagerly beat away at his opponent. Just like the mirror that had been constant between father and son since Luke's arrival in this timeline, Anakin and Asajj fought each other on another battlefront. Their sabers collided, the Jedi Knight eagerly fighting for his chance to have victory over his true rival. Father and son in different arenas, both connected with their double saber attacking opponents. Luke swept up underneath Sidious, pushing him onto the balls of his feet. Palpatine knocked the following strike away from him, before launching electricity at Skywalker. Luke's hand raised as he sucked the lightning into his hands, and Mara swung down from the sky. Sidious moved his saber into the air to defend himself, working just in time. Anakin on Yavin bashed Asajj backwards. Their duel was one of talent and of light and dark. Skywalker refused to delve into the dark side. He was an agent of light. Having never lost his hand, he couldn't be pulled in by darkness. He pushed Asajj backwards, relying on his power and his newfound adoration of the light. Ventress, despite her talents and her new master's training, found herself on the back pedal. Anakin was almost too much, even for her double-bladed attack. Luke followed behind his wife. She pressed her hand to the ground and swept Palpatine's legs out from under him, but he landed slightly before pressing off the ground with his hands and landing upright. Luke overpowered him, cutting down one of his sabers. It was a strike attack that he used against Dooku, sending a shockwave through Palpatine's wrist, a very uncomfortable one at that, which forced his concentration away from the duel. Luke batted Palpatine back into the wall, but he did not die. Luke ducked, just as Palpatine countered, giving Mara a chance to lodge her saber into Palpatine's bicep. Luke's counter came with him sweeping down across the side of the wall, removing the top of Palpatine's chest and sending the Sith Lord into the dark abyss of death. His father, on the other hand, defeated Ventress by overpowering her, relying on the light, and finding triumph through trust in the Force. His strength was assisted by his belief. 2 Sith, the last of them destroyed in one go. But there was still a remaining problem. As Mara had discovered, there was no route for Luke and herself to return to their timeline, if it even existed anymore. Emperor Palpatine had such unbelievable trust in his prime self that he believed Luke and Mara would die by his hands. But the old Emperor was wrong, and now the two of them had saved the galaxy from everything Sidious ever planned on doing. Not only was the Clone War a shell of what it should have been, but the Jedi would face no extinction. Luke and Mara would abandon Coruscant to search for more answers, but in the meantime, there'd be nothing to stop the peacemaking process. Coleman Trebor, the leading voice behind the End the War movement, had no competition without Palpatine. Thanks to Trench's defeat at Christophsis and his recovery, not to mention Ventress's confirmed death at Yavin 4, the Separatists were done for. Their leadership continued to fumble away various resources in arguments for control and power. They had a chance to find victory and they squandered it with every opportunity that came their way. That failure to seize the moment led to a total collapse from the war effort for the Separatist movement. Palpatine barely kept it afloat. Once he was removed from the equation, it was done for. Anakin returned to the temple as a hero. The actual hero that he idolized vanished completely from the galaxy, and the Jedi never truly learned of Luke's identity, or the death of Sidious. The common belief amongst the Jedi was that Asajj was Dooku's apprentice, and she was fighting to keep the war alive. They assumed that the rule of two came down to Tyrannus and Ventress. The Jedi, after the peace treaty, went out of their way to represent the clones as heroes, despite their negative origins. They'd be protected again by Coleman Trebor, who did everything within his power to keep them away from harm by the government's hand. Anakin would never find Luke, not until years later when he and Padme had their children, and said children grew up. The way he internalized what he saw in Geonosis and in the holograms from their security footage was that Luke was a premonition about his future children. Anakin believed that he had seen his future children, that being Luke, and he could see something far greater than he could ever be, which, in the end, is the true goal of parenthood, not to force oneself onto another, but to guide, to nurture, and to love said individual so that they can be someone far greater than their parents by learning and triumphing over generational traumas. That would be Anakin's message to Luke and Leia. The original Luke and Mara did not make themselves known to the galaxy. They had saved it, and no one knew, which was perfectly okay for both of them. Thanks to Luke and Mara never having been Skywalker in the original timeline, they had no reason to return to it. Also, it should be noted that they believed their timeline had completely vanished because of how much everything changed in the now. The Clone Wars ended in the span of less than 2 months, not even 3 years. It was a completely different galaxy. They instead retreated to an untouched world in the Outer Rim, called Pabu. It was a tropical paradise, where they could retire and continue to learn and train in the Force. They would not only have themselves their own son, named Ben Skywalker, but they'd have an assortment of trainees under their new sect. They called it the Jedi Order, named and spelt like the original iteration of the Jedi. In a way, this order would mirror the Guardians of the Whills on Jedha, a simple religious sect that pledged its loyalty to the Force. With the real Jedi Order helping the people of the galaxy with a completely level-headed chosen one leading the way, Luke and Mara didn't have to force themselves into servitude for the greater good. They chose to, but they were simple aids to a galaxy already restored to balance, and an order already adapting to make the lives of those across the cosmos better in every way. And that, my friends, is a pretty wholesome PP story if you ask me. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Don't forget to click on the description link to get the special discount CyberGhost VPN is granting to the channel users. This application will protect your data while you browse and give you full access to all blocked content on the internet for $2.03 a month only. Total risk-free, so check it out. Link in the description. Let's talk about the story. This story, I think, by the way, Coleman Kaj is like the most underrated hero of this story. We love Coleman Kaj, a big Coleman Kaj Glup Shido supporter here. He gets his place in the Wholesome PP Hall of Fame in this story. I kind of just love the fact that Coleman Trevor was just like the coolest guy ever in this story. So he's like a kind of funny C-plot that's just like actively like ending the war by being goated. But the main bulk of the story, I've had a bunch of Back to the Past stories with Luke. I did one a while back with Luke saving Anakin, obviously the most recent one with the Luke Order 66 and this one. I really like that this one is actually Luke going back because someone he loved has been taken away from him. And it's ironically in the attachment that he goes back that actually completely resets everything. And while yes, he does lose his own timeline, it is a much better timeline. And it's kind of like the concept from the original story is that Luke is willing to sacrifice his whole life for that. In this one, he gets to sacrifice his life, but he also gets to have his life where he has Mara Jade and Ben Skywalker to kind of develop in his own little corner of the galaxy away from the rest of the galaxy, which is kind of like the gift that keeps giving for him, is that he gets to help bring balance to the Force, but also get the plus side of it where he didn't in the previous iteration. I really wanted Luke to act as a shadow, and I wanted Sidious's motivation, being the resurrected Sidious, the somehow Sidious returned from Legends, to be the one that actually sets this all in motion. It's that Palpatine's arrogance and belief in his prime self, in quotations, in his quote-unquote prime self, is that he would be able to defeat Grandmaster Luke. Obviously that doesn't happen in this story, but I like the idea that he is intentionally sending Luke back to the Clone Wars so that he can kill him in his own prime, and that actually is what undoes everything, which is the irony. But I hope you all enjoyed a wholesome PP story. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.